All right, just give me 1 second while I get started. I'm a little bit early, but just getting ready. It's not quite 11 p.m. here yet, but so I won't start until it hits 11 o'clock. But let's see. Just give me 1 second here. All right. Great. How is the sound? Is the sound okay? If it's not, please let me know, and I'll try to adjust. Great. Whoops. There we go. That's better. Great. Okay. And let's see here. So you can talk amongst yourselves while I just get ready here. It'll be just a few more minutes. So just give me 1 second. All right. There's that. And let's see. Great. Great. Oh, GR62 is here. Anita Bonghi 2.0 is here. And Dungeon Studio is here. Great. Great. It's good to see you, my friends. It's nice to see you. I hope you are well, and I hope you saw the film Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and you enjoyed it. Jonah V is here in Belgium. Hello, great. It's nice to see you. Maybe it's our first time talking, perhaps. Alteron Kaiju is here. Hello. Heirloom Providence is also here. Hello. Gray Rainbow is here. Hello. Mark. Oh, Mark's here. Great. Gray Rainbow's from India. I didn't know this. So you and I have been talking recently, Gray Rainbow, on through YouTube comments, and so that's really wonderful. Oh, it's great to talk to you live. Wonderful. And let's see. Okay, so just give me one more second. Not one more second. Just give me a few more minutes, and you can talk amongst yourselves while I kind of get ready here. Should I put this up somewhere? Maybe not. Maybe not. I will be talking about the Japanese version of this film, so I won't be making too many references to the English dub version. But I'll make notes of that when the live stream is up and running, so to speak. And so let's see, what else? Is there anything else I forgot? Oh, okay. Great. Okay. And let's see. And I see, wow. Okay, Tomahawk238 says, hey Daisuke, I didn't do my homework and rewatch this yet, but I'll be watching the entire video once I do. Great, that's not a problem. The video will be uploaded as soon as this live stream is over. So, or maybe a few minutes after the live stream is over. I should be more specific about that. And so, yeah, so it's not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. You can always come back to this at any time. And I think it's probably better to watch the film first, because I will be talking about specific details, or I plan to anyway. So, but we're just going to start in a few more minutes. So everyone just let's wait a little bit more, and then we can start in earnest. We'll give it another 3 or 4 minutes or so, and then we'll start. So in the meantime, you can talk amongst yourselves. All right. Well, maybe I should undo my button here. How's that? That's probably a little bit better. There we go. Okay. Oh, David's here. Hello. Great. I have it on the TV too. Welcome. Great, great. So you can refer to it. And yeah, just doing this. It's great. Okay. And let's see. Is there anything else I need to do? I always forget a couple things. There are always things I forget, but let's see. I think that's it. I think that's it. We'll just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. So once again, please stand by. And I have this also in case I need to refer to it. Although I don't think I'll make some references to the Godzilla essay, which is on page 32. but I don't think I'll make too many references. Well, actually, I think I will, but we'll see what happens. Okay. All right. Let's see. And that's one. Okay. Okay. Great. Oh, Nazarene Prod's here. Great. Oh, you say you have a series of Godzilla videos up on your channel. Well done. All right. Can't wait to, yeah, please let everyone know. That'll be great. Let's see. All you lucky people says, what time is it in Tokyo? It's now almost 11 p.m. on Saturday, the 25th of January. So now my family is asleep and I have a couple hours to spare or so. So we'll see how long this goes. But okay, why don't we just get started? So, all right, greetings from Tokyo, everyone. This is Daisuke, and I hope you are doing very, very well. So today is the first film club live stream where we speak about a particular film. Today's film is from 1974. The film is called Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. In Japanese, because it's a Japanese film, the title of the film is Gojira Tai Mechagodzilla. So, this is directed by Jun Fukuda, and it is a kaiju tokusatsu film from Toho Studios in Japan. And kaiju means monster, giant monster, and tokusatsu means kind of special effects or special effects film. And so this is a monster special effects film from the studio. Now, this is one of many Godzilla films that were made around this time. And if you want to be specific, it is considered to be one of the films that constitute the so-called Showa era films of the Godzilla series. So this is from 1974, and in fact, it is the second to last so-called Showa era film series film, if we are to count the films from Godzilla in 1954 up to Terror of Mechagodzilla in 1975. If we were to count those block of films to be the Showa era films, then this film, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, falling in 1974, this is the 14th and the second to last of that Showa era block period. It's not technically correct if we think about the films that came in the 80s, and in fact there's another film, Godzilla, that actually is released during the Showa era, to be perfectly technical about it, but that's beside the point. But if we're talking about this actual block of films from 1954 to 1975, this falls in that block, of course, being in 1974. Now, the way this live stream will work is I will just be talking about this film in some specific detail. And along the way, I will be referring to the live chat, and I will be trying to answer as many questions or address as many comments as I can with respect to this film, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. So if you want to talk in the live chat, ask me a question or talk amongst yourselves about this film or anything else, please feel free to do so in the live chat. Now, I have to insist that if you want to ask me a question here, please contain your questions or comments directed to me to matters related to this film, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. If you want to ask me a question about something else entirely, you can do so in a comment in another video or something like that. I'm very happy to answer questions to the best of my ability. However, for the sake of today, because we are a little bit limited for time, I do want to focus my attention on this particular film. And so I will be just addressing and talking about any comments or questions in the live chat that relate to this particular film. So please don't be offended if I don't answer your question for that reason. But there are many opportunities elsewhere on this YouTube channel for us to chat if you want. But for purposes of today, I'd like to focus my energy on Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Then I should mention that I will be talking mainly about the Japanese version of this film, and I understand that the Japanese version has been recently made available through the great release by the Criterion Collection, which is right here. I understand also that it's been made available in a streaming services form, so that should be nice. I happen to have here also the Japanese Blu-ray of this, which is, I understand, to be the same digital master, whatever you want to call it, as that was used in the Criterion Blu-ray set. At least that's my understanding anyway. There have been many DVDs of this in Japan. There was this DVD in the United States, which I think has since, the Sony DVD, which has since been, it's fallen out of print. So if you are looking for a version of this film, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, on physical media with the English track available, there is this, of course. But you know, I think but I do want to focus on the Japanese version, and but of course I will be speaking in English, so there's that. Also, please note that I don't expect anyone to have seen all of the other Godzilla films. I will be making reference to other Godzilla movies, but I will try to do so in a way that respects anyone out there who's watching this live stream or this video and who hasn't necessarily seen any of the other Godzilla films. I don't want to spoil them or anything, but I will try to make references to them, but try to make them as vague as possible so as not to count as a so-called spoiler for any of those films. But I do want to emphasize that there are connections with other Godzilla films. There are compare and contrast type of things that I think make this film rather interesting indeed. But I think also I do want to stress and to suggest to you that this film, I think, stands very well on its own. And this is also a very fine sort of entry point for anyone who is interested in watching an example of the Showa-era Godzilla film series, apart from the first film, the Godzilla from 1954. So I think this is a really fine place to go. It's very entertaining. It's very, it has a nice fast pace to its plot and the like. There are flaws to the film, and I will try to address those as well today. But I think the flaws ultimately, and I do want to try to mention this as I go through my discussion here, but I even think the flaws serve the film rather well in an interesting way, because they make the film rather charming or kind of sweet and somewhat effective in that way. And it shows a great deal of earnestness on the part of the filmmakers responsible. So I do acknowledge that there are flaws, but I do think ultimately the flaws are either minor or they serve the film in a very interesting indirect way. Then finally, I should say that if you haven't seen the film Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, please don't watch this live stream or this video yet. I encourage you to watch the film first. Please watch the film first, and then you can come back to this live stream or this video at any time, because it'll be uploaded after this live stream is over. So there's that. Finally, I want to say that I am coming at this not as any kind of direct expert in Godzilla films. I don't count myself as a Godzilla historian, that I am not. I don't consider myself a Godzilla expert, that I am not as well. I don't have any direct connection with this film in terms of the principal photography or the production or anything like that. I have no connection with this film at all. I only know this film as an admirer of this film. I've seen this film countless times, and since I was a little kid, I've seen this film. Maybe the first time I saw it, I must have been about, oh gosh, I don't even remember, maybe 5, 6, 7, something like that. But I was very, very young, and it was on a VHS tape, and so and I watched it constantly at home. It was so much fun, and even now I return to it rather regularly. So I am coming at this as a fan of this film, and so there are points where I don't necessarily have answers to all the questions that you might have. I don't have all of the bits of trivia in my head, so I can't claim to be an expert in this film, and I can't claim to be able to answer every single question that might be raised in respect of this film. But I will certainly do my best, and that is hopefully something that we can work with as we go through this film together, you and I. And there we go. So with that, my friend, let us begin, and let me start with my sort of opening statements, or opening salvo, if you will, about this film. So this is a kind of it's in 1974, and it is a film that comes after a number of Godzilla films have already been made. And so at this point, we have a lot of sort of Godzilla history. It's very significant that this film comes when it does. It comes at 1974. It was released in March 1974 in Japan. At least that's my understanding anyway. And this is very significant because 1974 is 20 years after the release of the first Godzilla in Japan in 1954. So this is sort of a 20th anniversary year of the Godzilla series as it stood at the time. This is also a film that was released during the so-called Toho Champion Festival, Champion Matsuri, and I don't want to get into too many details about that right now, but I will say that this is also something that is, I'll try to get into it a little bit later, but this I think is very significant in how this film seems to be focusing a lot on kind of action. It has a little bit of a sort of a suspense thriller element with the human story. There's also a sci-fi element with the aliens from the Black Hole Planet 3 aliens. And also there's sort of a folklore or mysticism element there with Okinawa and the House of Azumi and the High Priest and Nami and the whole connections with King Caesar or Sisa. So and there's all that stuff jumbled in there. Plus you have on top of that, of course, this idea of Godzilla and the new foe in town, Mechagodzilla. And this is Mechagodzilla's first appearance. And oh gosh, what a debut this is. And we have a lot of mayhem, a lot of monster battles, a lot of bloodletting, some pretty graphic monster-on-monster violence, and the like. And so this is a sort of a jamboree, if you will, of things and ideas that give this a high-paced sort of feel. And I think that makes it very much a film that is, I think, it seems to be pointing in one direction, namely it's laying down this idea of trying to establish to the best of its ability, and this idea about a mystery. Who are these guys who are following our heroes? Keisuke Shimizu, who's the sort of the hero of the film. I think he's an architect, but he's also just an everyday. He's pretty much a superhero in the sense that he's very physically skilled, and he knows how to handle a gun, and he can run around, and I think he knows a little bit of martial arts even, so he can really handle himself very well, and he's sort of an all-purpose sort of hero. And then we have the female lead, who is from the Shuri University, and her name is Saeko Kanagusuku, and she's also helping to try to solve this riddle of King Caesar and the prophecy that the Okinawan people from way back seem to have developed about the seeing the mountain and the Black Mountain in the sky, and also the sun rising in the west, and all this stuff. And so all this is, I think, laying down some kind of foundation for a little bit of a mystery that's propelling the film forward in a certain way. Plus you have this idea of a science fiction element here with the aliens that are masquerading as sort of humans, but underneath they appear to be some kind of apes. And whenever they are killed or they are injured, they seem to have dark black-green blood. And then when they die, their actual monkey sort of faces or ape faces are shown. And so this has a kind of science fiction element and they wear silver jumpsuits and all this stuff, and they have interesting weaponry, and they are the ones that are controlling Mechagodzilla, and the whole plot with the aliens is apparently they're going to use Mechagodzilla to conquer Earth. Of course. So there is all this sort of general genre stuff that is jumbled up in here. Does it make for an actually coherent plot from A to B to C to D? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. But I would try to suggest here that even if one thinks that the actual jumps of the narrative from here to here to here, and all the characters that are involved, and believe me, there are so many characters. I think it's so superfluous, the amount of characters that are being introduced here. You have Keisuke and his brother Masahiko, and then you have Saiko Kanagusuku, I think, and then you have Professor Wagura, who's the uncle, but he doesn't really do anything. He kind of appears, and then he doesn't appear in the latter half of the film. And then there is the people from Interpol, and then we have all the hold on, excuse me once. Ooh, my computer froze. Give me 1 second here. Oh. Sorry about that. What was this? Yeah, so then we have the officers from the Interpol. We have Nambara, and also we have another white-jacketed guy who just comes in randomly, who's Tamura, who's also partnering with Nambara for whatever reason. He just shows up just in time. And then we have Miyajima, Professor Miyajima, and his daughter, and then their whole setup with, he's an expert in metals from outer space, so he can identify this little piece of metal as being space titanium. He also has a special pipe that comes in handy, and so there's a lot of stuff. And then we have the Okinawan folklore element here with the high priest, the grandfather, and then the granddaughter Nami, who can see visions apparently of the future, but that's not really quite explained. But all this stuff comes together, but she has some kind of special power which enables her to awaken King Caesar when the time is right. And so that the way that I'm explaining it is I'm trying to, this is on purpose, right? Because I'm trying to convey to you the fact that if we think about it very carefully, this is all a kind of jumble. It's a big jumble that just, if we step back and think about it, it really doesn't quite make a lot of sense in a lot of places, if we really, really think about it. And there are some characters that come in, but they don't really do anything. And they sort of are superfluous, or they're on the periphery in favor of the more main characters that are trying to thrust the narrative forward. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in one sense of that, because the reason why we watch these films is for the monster fights, Right? I think that's the main reason. Of course, we want to have a nice human story element attached to it, but we are here for the monster fights. And I think here we have a film that is, perhaps relatively speaking, quite low in terms of the monster, the amount of time that the monsters appear on screen. When we compare this to other films in the Godzilla series, it's probably a little bit low. We don't get a lot of monster fights here. We get one fight between Godzilla and Anguirus. We get another fight between Godzilla and Godzilla. And then we get another fight between Mechagodzilla and then King Caesar. And then we see Godzilla join into that fight, and it's a 2-on-1 fight between King Caesar and Godzilla on the one hand, and then Mechagodzilla on the other. So, but in between that sort of sparse lineup of fighting, we have the human story, which I think takes up the bulk of the running time. So the fight scenes here are quite relatively low in terms of running time, but in terms of quality and in terms of dramatic thrust, I think it's safe to say that the fights themselves offer a lot of unique ingenuity and some pretty shocking moments, as well as thrills and chills and a lot of exhilarating moments and fist-pumping excitement that comes into the fray as well as some clever bits and also some funny bits and some pretty sort of sad bits as well, in particular with the Anguirus character, but I'll get to that in a second. So there is a lot of stuff that's going on, and it might seem like a bit of a melee, but if we can just even, despite that, or notwithstanding those points, I think it still hangs together very, very well, because the human story's pace is fast enough and it's brisk so that it doesn't stop to take time for the viewer to try to figure out, heck, this doesn't quite make sense here, but it doesn't stop to that. It just keeps going from here to here to here at a sort of breakneck speed. And then when we think we can't quite, when the story seems to have reached a limit, then we go to the monster scenes, which help to carry the load of the film, as it were. So I actually like this balance very, very much in this film, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. So that is sort of my opening salvo, if you will, for just general comments about this film. But before I continue, let me go to the live stream, live chat, and we shall go from there. So Patrick is here. All you lucky people says, is this the Godzilla film where the Okinawan Shisa statue-based King Caesar appears? Yes, that's correct. And I should make one point about the name King Caesar. So it's spelled in English Caesar. So it's okay to call it King Caesar. I think it's sort of akin to calling Gojira Godzilla. The Japanese name is Gojira, but the English transliteration is often spelled Godzilla. So it's I think very acceptable to pronounce the name Godzilla the way it is. Or you can say Gojira if you want to be more, closer to the Japanese appellation. The same is true, I think, for King Caesar, because if it's Caesar, it's okay to pronounce it Caesar, but in fact, the name is Shisa, which is derived from the sort of this kind of dog-like figure in Okinawan folklore. And in fact, the look of Caesar, King Caesar, is meant to be modeled after this. And it's a perfect link to Okinawan folklore and the like. So, in fact, if you want to be close to the Japanese pronunciation, one can say King Shisa. But if you want to stick with how it looks in English, you can say King Caesar. So anywhere is fine. Let's see. Patrick is here. Hello. Let's see. Dungeon Studios says, which Godzilla movie started to show physical expressions of frustration, humor, slyness, etc.? All you lucky people says asks, does the Japanese Blu-ray have English subtitles? No, it does not, unfortunately. Alex de Quox says, hello, I love Akihiko Hirata. Yes, Akihiko Hirata is the actor who plays Professor Miyajima, right? He is so much fun to watch in every movie he's in. Which actor gives your favorite performance in this movie? I'll get to that in a second, but I think that Miyajima's Hirata's Miyajima is probably the best. I also like the uh, Mutsumi Goro Mutsumi, who plays the alien leader, Kuronuma. I like him very much. I like the way he's sort of chomping on his cigar and drinking his sort of, alcoholic beverage like cognac or something, while his underlings are saying, Commander, we have to repair Mechagodzilla before the home base finds out, or something like that. And he's like, oh, okay, let's go find an expert on Earth who can help us repair Mechagodzilla, or something like that. I just love his nonchalant attitude. He's so he's very much a laid-back kind of supervillain, as it were. I liked his acting. It's great. And also Masaki Daimon as Shimizu. Keisuke Shimizu, I think he does a really good job. He's very earnest and very rugged, and he almost has like a James Bond type of feel about it. But I'll try to get to that a little bit later. Let's see here. Let's see. Jared is here. Hello. I found the dub to be quite well overall. Sometimes it seemed a bit cheesy with some characters, but I think it added to the charm of the film. Let's see. Patrick says, I remember watching this on Channel 4 UK TV many years ago. The reception was not great, so the picture was very poor, but I remember being mesmerized. Gray Remember says, I never liked the dub movie. And there's a discussion here about dubs here. Alteron Kaiju says, it's a great gumbo of a film. JR60 says, the aliens needed a better plan. Yes, in Godzilla films, well, actually, this is a good point. Let me start with the aliens here, and then this will lead into my next discussion, is how I think this film links to Godzilla films of the past. Okay. So you mentioned, JR62, that the aliens needed a better plan. I agree. I agree. If we look at the aliens in this film, their plan was, okay, they were going to hide out in this cave in Okinawa, Gyoksen Cave in Okinawa, and they were gonna have Mechagodzilla be launched from this underground lair, and then attack and destroy or conquer Japan. And so they thought about this very hard, and they thought the best way to conquer the world or conquer Japan would be to construct this huge Mechagodzilla. And not only that, let's construct Mechagodzilla. Let's create a synthetic skin to make him look like the real Godzilla, and let's make him attack parts of Japan. And while we're at it, we must stop those forces, and we must discover the secret of King Caesar, because that could be a great threat to our plan, which is Mechagodzilla disguised as the actual Godzilla. So yes, that's a pretty ludicrous plan. And if we really think about the alien, what they're doing there, their crew is quite sparse. There isn't that many people there. It seems like a big operation, but if we really count how many people who are in the silver jumpsuits, it's really not that many. It's kind of a handful. And they have all this technology, like they have cameras that can that can zoom into things. He has a special camera that can look, for instance, when Shimizu's car's out there, remember, and around the middle, or maybe the latter half of the film, the human characters escape from the lair, and they're about to start the car, which is, I think, a 70s model 2000 GT Toyota with a creamy, kind of a creamy gold color to it. And remember, Keisuke is about to turn on the ignition, but Nambara from Interpol stops him just in time, and then suddenly we get a cut to the key ignition turning, and then boom, it explodes. And then Kuronuma, the alien leader, is satisfied that he has destroyed all the people and just turns off the monitor. Well, apparently his monitor didn't quite catch the fact that Nambara had a little string thing, and he was tying it all up and pull the key from outside of the car. So the alien technology was good enough to catch the car, but it wasn't good enough to catch the people walk out of the car and then them tying the rope to the thing and doing that. So there's that, of course. So there's also this interesting thing about they have all this alien technology, but if you recall, there's a door, there's an outside door from the cave into the lair, and then there's another door, I think, from the outer corridor into the inner sanctum of the lair. But you can't. There's a special hidden button in the cave that one has to press in order to open the outer door, I think. But in the inner perimeter door, there's no camera or anything like that. Do you remember how they have to open it? There's a password. And the password, I think, is, if someone says Alpha, you have to say Kentaurus, which is Alpha Centauri. So one side says Alpha, the other side says Centauri, and that's how they know to open the door. There's no camera, there's no button, there's no code to press, and that sort of thing. It's a very sort of primitive way to secure one's lair. If you ask me. And so there are kind of a lot of plot holes already if we think about the alien setup. But that adds to the charm of it, and I think the Alpha Centauri code is very important because if you recall, the first time we hear it is when the part of the group are they're trying to infiltrate the base. Remember, it's Shimizu and it's Nambara from Interpol. They're exploring the cave, and one of the aliens comes in, and then it's Shimizu, and then Shimizu's about to get killed, but then Nambara comes in just in time to rescue him, and then the alien's arm is injured to the point it becomes ape-like or something like that, and then they take the guard there to the door, and then they use him to go infiltrate the base, and that's where they find out the code, which is important too, because later Nambara from Interpol will have to come back in again the second time to with Masahiko and Professor Miyajima, right? So they have to go in and infiltrate the second time in order to stop Mechagodzilla and the aliens to stop their plot from going into fruition. So this is all to say that the alien plot is quite ludicrous in many respects, but this is part of the charm of the film. And this is also, I think, hearkening back to this sort of tradition of alien invasion that we saw, not in all of the past Godzilla films, but we did see it in, I think, quite prominently in the film Invasion of Astro Monster. And even there we had aliens that used or thought about conquering Earth or something with the help of kaiju and that sort of thing. And they had silver jumpsuits and the like. It's a very iconic image from that film, where I think here that harkens back to that. So that's almost a kind of an homage to the immediate past, if you will, of Godzilla. The alien race is, of course, different, but it's still quite similar in that respect. We also saw a sort of a subterranean race, Seatopia, and Godzilla versus Megalon, which had a similar kind of concept, using a monster to try to get back at the human race and that sort of thing. So this sort of plot is quite common in Godzilla films, and so it's not, I think by this time it's sort of it can become quite expected, and so therefore it's not necessarily important to create a airtight plot with respect to the aliens. We just need that alien menace to be established, and then we can move on with the story, as it were. So there is that, of course. But they are here to use Mechagodzilla to conquer, to attack Tokyo or something like that. So okay, let's talk about this will be a nice way to get into the monsters here. So they control Mechagodzilla. They've constructed and they control Mechagodzilla, and it's an interesting thing, right? They use switches and buttons to control Mechagodzilla, but then also they use a microphone. They actually speak to Mechagodzilla directly. So there's sort of like there's a control room, but there's also a relationship. There's also control inside the head of Mechagodzilla. So there's an interesting interplay there. So you don't necessarily are controlling every aspect of Mechagodzilla's movements, but there's also a relationship, a communication relay between the control room and whatever the inner brain of Mechagodzilla, the computer brain of Mechagodzilla, however it works exactly. But Mechagodzilla is one of the great foes in Godzilla Showa era lore, in my opinion. And it's wonderful how Mechagodzilla emerges for the first time. We see this sort of flying rock or something that flies through the air for some unexplained reason. And there's a nice science fiction buzz sound to it as it crashes, and there's an explosion, and suddenly we see Godzilla appear. And at the very outset, we notice something a little bit off with Godzilla, because his roar is not the usual roar that we associate with Godzilla. It has a higher screech to it, which is something that will set off alarm bells immediately for any astute watchers of Godzilla. But it is the visage and the appearance of Godzilla, and this is for the first time we see in a long time we see a Godzilla that is an antagonist. Godzilla comes in and we see him wreck a building quite randomly. And so everyone is wondering, what's going on, and this sort of thing. This is very interesting. Hold on here. I'm sorry, what was I saying? Yes, so it's very interesting because on the Japanese Blu-ray here that I have, there's a commentary track with Teruyoshi Nakano, who is the special effects director of this film, and director Nakano was saying how this was like, and he was making reference to the fact that, and also the moderator of this commentary were making reference to the fact that, this was a Toho champion film, or Champion Matsuri film, and this Champion Matsuri series by Toho this was a period of years from the late 60s to the early 70s, or I should say the mid to late 70s. And during this span of about close to 10 years, Toho released a number of films designed to try to attract children into the theater. And what they did therefore is that they tried to schedule their releases with double features, triple features, and the like, and almost always these monster films or tokusatsu special effects films, in a way to try to attract a younger audience to the theaters. It was a way because they needed to find different ways and innovative ways to try to essentially make money at the box office. And so this was part of that series. And so part of that thinking, if you think about it, is if this film is released during that period, as it's filmed, it's a film that's released as as one of the Champion Festival films, then we can think of this film as being like, on the one hand, it's a film that should be designed for, let's say, a kid audience. And so if we think about that, it's great to see lots of monsters and thrills. And in fact, the first monster we see on screen in a dark, kind of foreboding, ominous, blackened sky and an island, which might be Monster Island, although it's not quite clear if we think about what happened to Monster Island in the previous film, Godzilla vs. Megalon. But we see the first monster, which is Anguirus, who cries out rather ominously, and then that leads into the titles of the film, right? But my point here is that, on the one hand, these fights and this film seem to be designed for kids, right? In other words, we see a lot of monster action and a lot of human James Bond type of action and that sort of thing. So on the one hand, it might seem like it's for kids, but this also brings a dark, ominous tone to the Godzilla mythos and the Godzilla image and the Godzilla brand, because the first thing we see is Godzilla as a bad guy. It's really Mechagodzilla disguised as Godzilla, but my point is what we see is Godzilla as a bad guy. And if we recall what Godzilla was at the starting point of the Showa era films, and a few films into the series, we can remember that Godzilla was in fact an antagonist. Godzilla was a bad guy. And it was only around the midpoint of the series that he turned, from a heel into a goodie. He was a baddie first, but then he became a goodie. He became a good guy. And so up to now, he was always perceived as being a good guy. Well, here we have Godzilla doing pretty bad stuff. So that's one way in which this film links back to a kind of past of Godzilla. Namely, it is borrowing the antagonist element of Godzilla and putting it at the very start of the introduction of the Godzilla character as he is seen destroying a building and stuff like that. This linkage to Godzilla past is cemented even further when we get our first kaiju fight here, which is between Godzilla and Anguirus. Now, Anguirus emerges from the earth and sort of tries to stop Godzilla, but Godzilla is too tough, and Godzilla's fight sort of attacks Anguirus head on, and it's very fast, and there's a big painful kick that Godzilla gives to Anguirus, so Godzilla is down for the count. And then there's a bit with Godzilla throwing Anguirus from behind with the tail up and down, up and down. It's quite brutal, and it ends with a really gross, bloody thing of Godzilla essentially breaking open the jaw and the mouth of Anguirus, poor Anguirus, and the blood comes out, and it becomes a big mess. And then the once beautiful, almost siren-sounding call of Anguirus becomes this blood-curdling gurgle, and he's just left as a mess, and he's left crawling away into the dust, as it were. So this is another linkage to the past, right? Because up to recently, Anguirus had been a kind of a friend of Godzilla. I mean, Godzilla was almost like his boss in a way in Godzilla versus Gigan. Godzilla was giving him orders, do this, do that, that sort of thing. And Anguirus would be just, okay, I'll do whatever it is. So Anguirus was this loyal friend to Godzilla up to now. So to see this scene between them and the way it ends up must have been very shocking to an audience back then. It certainly is shocking to me when I see it and I think about the Godzilla-Anguirus relationship up to then. Let me say two more things and I'll get to the comments here. But with respect to this, it's interesting to remember, of course, that the second film of the Godzilla series, Godzilla Raids Again, is very notable for the fact that this is the first time we see another kaiju, not Godzilla. And in fact, it's Anguirus. And in fact, Godzilla Raids Again, the second film, is the film where we see Godzilla and Anguirus fighting and stuff like that. Well, here in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, we're getting this kind of a parallel feeling, if you will. Godzilla and Anguirus are fighting their foes, right? So that links back to the second film in the series, where Godzilla 2 was an antagonist. What we just had a second kaiju on the screen as well. So that is, I think, a very interesting linkage. Also, an interesting point about this fight between Anguirus and Godzilla is this. So, if you notice the suit, Godzilla's suit, Godzilla has a suit that looks like the Godzilla suit for most of the shots of this fight. But then there comes a point where Anguirus knocks a bit of skin off of Godzilla's upper arm or shoulder here, and it reveals a little bit of what ends up being identified by Professor Miyajima as being space titanium, the stuff that Mechagodzilla is made of. So we figure out that there's something underneath, or there's something going on with the skin, right? And then it's at that point, if you recall, that the suit noticeably becomes a different suit, right? Because there are actually two Godzilla suits that were used for this film. One was the standard suit that was used in past films, but then it was sort of updated or made up even more for purposes of this film. And then there was a second suit. The second suit was, I think it was a kind of a cheaper suit. It was made for sort of travel purposes, according to the Godzensky essay, which you can find in the Criterion Blu-ray set. So it was a noticeably different look. It kind of had a cheaper look to it, but I mean, instead of having to pay all this money to make a new suit, Toho decided to have a suit that was already on hand as a double. And that double was used in certain shots of this Anguirus fight. Not all the shots, but some of the shots. So you can kind of tell sometimes there's a cut to Godzilla, and Godzilla looks a little bit chubbier in his head area there, or his mouth doesn't quite close all the way. It has a wider mouth or something like that. So it has a kind of an odd, off-putting sort of look. But I kind of like that here. It can be seen as a flaw, but I think that could also be seen also as a charming effect of this film. Maybe unintentional, but a charming effect. Here's why. Anguirus knows that this is an imposter. This is not the real Godzilla. And in fact, that's probably why Anguirus cried out and tried to fight Godzilla when he did. This is something that Keisuke Shimizu puts together in his head just before the final, the ultimate reveal of Mechagodzilla around the middle of the film, of course, because Keisuke Shimizu is a very resourceful young man. But Anguirus probably knew this already. And so it's interesting to note that maybe a way to explain this is that from Anguirus's point of view, this is an imposter Godzilla, and therefore those shots of the sort of the bloated second suit Godzilla, that is not obviously the main suit Godzilla, the sort of the cheaper Godzilla suit, if you will, the replacement Godzilla suit, that could be seen as being, and I'm making a big stretch here, but please bear with me. This could be seen as being maybe from Anguirus's point of view to give us a visual representation of the fact that this is not really the Godzilla, the real Godzilla, but this is in fact an imposter Godzilla, which it ends up being, of course, because this is in fact Mechagodzilla hidden underneath the fake skin of a Godzilla lookalike. And so I always like to think of this second suit Godzilla that appears in certain shots of this particular fight, not all, but certain of the shots, as being Anguirus's point of view. It's sort of like Anguirus knows that this is a fake, and the fact that it's a different suit gives credence to that in a visual sense. But I kind of like that. But I should note also that it's this scene, Godzilla doesn't use any atomic breath. He doesn't use any of the Mechagodzilla weapons that we'll see later. It's just raw power Godzilla and just a rugged, a no-holds-barred fight Godzilla. And I think that is really, really quite effective. So it's a great way to open the monster fights of the film. But let me just stop there, and let me go to the comments here, and then I will continue. Jared Wignall says this is a very fun film. Alex says the simians are really fun villains. I've always loved the transformation from human to ape when they get seriously hurt or killed. Let's see. Just jumped here, but I will be back. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Alteron Kaiju says very powerful pipe. Daisuke. Gray Rainbow says I haven't watched it or any of the Godzilla movies. Yes, Jared Wignall says, I found the transformations whenever the simians are hurt or killed to be very amusing. Yeah, it is very, it's kind of odd, although there's the first one, which I'll try to get to in a second, where he gets shot, I think, in the face. You know, the mustached guy, right? And he gets shot in the face, and then part of his, when he's trying to get when Shimizu and Masahiko are on the ferry, the Queen Coral ferry on the way to Okinawa, and the guy with the mustache comes in and they fight, and he pulls out his knife and he slices the hand of Shimizu. And right, he gets shot, but then part of his face turns, and not everything, it turns into like this gross thing. It's really shocking. I just love Shimizu's look on his face, like, huh? You know, he's just, what is this? So, and then you've got that wonderful groan that comes, and then he runs out with the statue, of course, which is ends up being a fake. But let's see. Yeah, it is kind of amusing if we think about it. Let's see here. Yeah, the Jared says the first monster fights got quite bloody at times. Actually, that's a good point. I forgot to bring up, but I'll try to bring it up later. You know, I mentioned before that this film is trying to make, or it maybe not trying, but it has links to the past of Godzilla, namely Godzilla as an antagonist. Godzilla fighting Anguirus, the aliens that are invasion of Astro Monster-like aliens, and that sort of thing. But at the same time, there are some innovations that make this quite distinct from the 60s era Godzilla films. And one of those distinctions is the fact that the 60s era didn't usually have bloody monster fights. The kaiju fights, if you look at those 60s era films, were free from any sort of bloodletting. The sort of bloodletting stuff and the gross flesh-melting stuff really began in the 70s with Godzilla versus Hedorah, and then there's a kind of a blood scene in Godzilla versus Gigan. Maybe the blood quotient is a little bit low in Megalon, although there's some bone breaking and arm breaking or limb breaking in that one. And then there's that sort of thing. And then here we have a lot of blood spray and gushing and all that stuff. So this is actually a trend that we see in the 70s fights more than the 60s kaiju fights, the Godzilla series anyway. And so I would say that this mark of violence in the fights is one way that this film and the 70s films overall are distinct from the 60s era Godzilla films. And it makes them rather, I think, it makes them an interesting mix. If we think about this film, on the one hand, oh, is it really okay to make films like this for children if this is going to be released during, let's say, the Toho's Champion Festival? We expect this to be made for kids. But at the same time, you know, it is sort of like how does I say? Like comic book violence or popcorn flick violence in a certain way, and so it kind of it's shocking, and it can really affect a certain segment of the film going population, I suppose. But on the other hand, it can be quite exhilarating for kids who are watching this stuff and who like to see this sort of stuff transpire on films, on the screen, as it were. And that sort of thing. It does also add this element of violence used in a, how should I put it, in a kind of artistic way, for lack of a better phrase. But there is that. Let's see. Yes, and then Alex says the special effects scenes directed by Nakano are definitely exciting. Yes, so this is the Nakano era of special effects, and so that has a lot to do with it as well. And JR62, maybe an homage to samurai films with blood spray and that sort of thing. Yes, it could be that. The blood spray is part of it, and we do see blood spray. There's a bit at the end fight with when Mechagodzilla is flying through the air, and he uses his eye beams to hit the neck of Godzilla, and by this time Godzilla's already pretty bloodied up. But then you see the spray come out, and he falls down with howling, which is quite gruesome. Just skipping around here. Okay, Preston is here. Hello. Jimmy is here. Hello. And talking about the score, which I will get to in a second. Yes. Jared is. Yes. Now we're talking about the aliens plan. Great. Yeah. Yeah, Altron Kaiju says a big flaw is that they needed an Earth scientist. Exactly. They needed to. They were in a hurry, and they didn't want to get found out, or they didn't want their mistakes to be found out by HQ, as it were. And so they said, okay, we'll get the leading scientist who happens to be nearby. And I love that scene where Kuronuma, the alien leader, has Professor Miyajima, and by this time they've taken his daughter into the jail cell or something. It will end up being this hypercharged sauna, I suppose. But I love the bit where he says, let's make a deal. You will get to see your daughter if you help us repair the damaged Mechagodzilla. And I love how he points his gun. And he's sitting there, and he's sitting in the chair. He points his gun. He stands up, and the way he points it's so quirky. He doesn't point it at his head, or he doesn't point it. He points it at his chin, like this. I love that. I always laugh out loud when it's such a, it's meant to be ominous, I suppose, but I always laugh out loud. That gives me such a happy thrill, I suppose. And then it then cuts to a kind of a sultry, slow jazz music as we go cut from there, which is a very sinister, suspenseful scene, to I think the lazy nighttime of the Queen Coral, the fairy, and that storyline as well. So that's an interesting cross cutting as well. All right, just skipping around here. Okay, skipping around. Jimmy says, I thought it would have been cool if Jet Jaguar had shown up. Yes, there's not a love for Jet Jaguar, I suppose. Although there had been, according to the Godzilla essay, of course, there had been plans to introduce, not introduce, but to have Gigan appear as Mechagodzilla's sort of ally, if you will. So I think it would have been, if all four monsters had been included, it would have been Gigan and Mechagodzilla on the one hand, and then Godzilla and perhaps King Caesar on the other hand. So it would have been a 2-on-2 tag team fight, which is not dissimilar to the tag team fight that we saw in some earlier films. But it's a also according to the Godzilla essay, this was. Perhaps it was decided not to use Gigan because Mechagodzilla, as designed, was such a powerful foe that he could just stand his own without any help. And for the most part in the film, that's true because he is pretty indestructible throughout the majority of those fight scenes. So, but it's pretty interesting. Let's see. And then JR62, I love how Godzilla invents a new power with each. I'll get to that power in a second here. But actually, I would suggest that the power. Well, actually, let me get to that too, because that is related to how this film is, on the one hand, related to the past Godzilla, but then is also setting its own path forward, as it were. So I mentioned before that there are links to Godzilla's past. And the same is true for Godzilla's powers, but not in a direct way. I'll try to explain. So, in past Godzilla films, Godzilla has always been seen as being a monster. How do we stop the monster threat? A lot of times, electricity and high amounts of electricity are always thought by the military or whoever as being a way to try to stop Godzilla, sort of Godzilla resistance, like create a barrier of electricity or something around the perimeter of a city or something. It never works, but this is to say that in the early films, electricity was seen to not necessarily harm Godzilla. Then, around the middle of the series, there was a particular film where we see electricity, or the lightning bolt, create a way to awaken a sleeping Godzilla. And so, the link with Godzilla's energy and electricity began around the middle of the series. It's Akira, Horror of the Deep. And then this idea of electricity, I think, gives way to how Godzilla seems to be rechargeable with a strike of lightning. And we see that happen in the middle of the film after the first fight with Mechagodzilla. He goes back to what was probably Monster Island or some island, right? And he gets charged with electricity, and we see his dorsal, right, fins there. The spikes get lit up, etc. And so we understand intuitively, anyway, that perhaps electricity becomes a source of his energy here. And we never really saw that before, but directly, except in the reference to Akira, Horror of the Deep, which I saw. The only antecedent, perhaps, that is directly related to this is not necessarily with Godzilla, but with King Kong. In the film King Kong versus Godzilla, we saw how Kong and electricity are related. And there's actually a similar relationship between Kong and electricity in that film, and Godzilla and electricity in this film. And it's interesting too, right, if we recall that this film is credited as being written by, among other people, Shinichi Sekizawa. And so the commentary to this Blu-ray makes this point very well. if we recall that, Sekizawa was responsible or credited as being the writer, or one of the writers anyway, to King Kong versus Godzilla. It's interesting to speculate that perhaps this idea of Kong and electricity and energy, and Godzilla and electricity and energy might have this sort of antecedent connection. But it's an interesting thing to speculate on. But then we go into this power that seems to come out of nowhere, as GR62 alludes to, which is this idea at the final fight between Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, of course, as Mechagodzilla is flying away after having just pulverized Godzilla, shot him in the neck with his eye bolts, and then uses his finger missiles, which have up to now been explosive finger missiles, but here they suddenly become darts, and they stick into his chest there in a very gruesome and painfully looking way. And Godzilla's just writhing on the ground there, just barely struggling to keep it together. And then suddenly he just gets this second wind, and he turns and he gets this breath, and then he does this thing with his arms like this, and then boom, he does a little charge, and his back blows up. And then it blows up, and then we cut in, and it becomes a bit of reverse photography, which is very clever. And then we see two sort of electric towers fly through the air rather inexplicably, and they crash into him to seem to signify that he's become a magnetic force, able to magnetically attract the metal of Mechagodzilla, the space titanium of Mechagodzilla. So this kind of becomes an inexplicable power. Comes out of nowhere. Gorjitsensky in the essay explains this as being alludes to it as being a little bit of an unbelievable part of the film. And this isn't the first time that we've seen Godzilla suddenly show off a power that we haven't seen. We've seen this in past films, of course. But I would actually posit that this power is not necessarily inexplicable, and it's not altogether kind of ludicrous from my point of view. And it's because there is this, in one's mind, one doesn't have to have a perfectly logical scientific explanation for everything in the Godzilla universe. And so I think it's very easy in my mind anyway to link this idea of electricity charge and lightning and stuff, and we can think also that charges and magnetic charges, magnetic fields, that sort of thing. I think in my mind, I can make that link because it's not scientific logic, but it's film science, And so I think it's, for me anyway, not a ludicrous jump to make if we consider all the sort of mysterious ways in which Godzilla and electricity seem to be handled. It's never given any kind of specific scientific explanation by any of the scientists in the film, and so I think a lot is left to the imagination, and therefore there is much room for suspension of disbelief, shall we put it that way? And I think part of that room for suspension of disbelief is also the scope of believability that encompasses this link between his electricity and then the use or the ability to become a magnet. So I don't know, I think I can make that leap in my mind, and it's not the most ludicrous power that I've seen in a Godzilla series. There have been pretty ludicrous ones in the past, but this isn't one of them, I think. I think it works very well. And also, I think it's heightened by the dramatic tension. And if we recall, every moment up to that moment, every part of the fight up to that moment, Godzilla and Anguirus and King Caesar, they've just been losing. Well, King Caesar had held his own for a little bit, I suppose. But for the most part, it's just been a losing battle. They never had the upper hand. Godzilla never had the upper hand. The most you could say is he had a draw at the first fight, but even so, he was pretty bloodied up. And it probably wasn't even a draw. I think Mechagodzilla had the upper hand at the first fight. And then the second fight, he came in and he tried to do a quick fire breath with his atomic breath, but he missed. And then Mechagodzilla flew in and then attacked his neck. And then he tried to penetrate his neck spinning shield, but he couldn't penetrate it and all this stuff. So everything up to that, Godzilla's just been on the ropes. When we get to that point where Godzilla becomes a magnet, it's like this huge hurrah moment. It's a fist pumping moment actually, and he does that, and the darts are in his skin, and the Masaru Sato music is just relentlessly dun dun dun, it's just going like that, and then suddenly we get a close up of Godzilla looking up. He's not giving up. He is determined to beat this guy, and he thinks back to his I always think of it as like he thinks back to his training when he was still training to become this electricity magnet, black belt or something, and then he just remembers he had to do this move, and then boom, he does it completely out of nowhere. I get it, but it comes at such it's expressed in such a wonderfully dramatic way, and it's so fist pumping, and it's that moment that turns the tide, of course, because the weakness of Mechagodzilla is, of course, being magnetized and also being attacked from behind. For whatever reason, Mechagodzilla has a lot of front loaded weaponry. He has the chest that opens up and does that little zigzag electric beam. He has the things that come out of his eyes. When he's dressed up as Godzilla, he has the yellow breath, of course. He has his finger missiles. He has his missiles from his knee. He has his toe missiles, etc. But there's nothing from behind. The only thing he can do from behind, at least as far as we can tell, is he can turn his head 180. But that's basically it. So if he can't turn his head 180, then he is quite vulnerable from behind, and so that's probably the weakness, and that's how Godzilla he holds him from behind, and then as King Caesar rams into him multiple times, Mechagodzilla becomes gradually subdued, of course. But my point is that the moment where he unleashes his magnet power is the moment where the tides turn and the music swells, and that becomes a hugely dramatic moment. And I think for that reason, it becomes such a fist-pumping moment, one of my favorite moments in this film, in fact. All right, let's see here. Okay, so let me just go back to the chat here. There's talk here about Anguirus. He always gets the short end of the stick. I know. I was just doing his best, just doing his best, but oh well. Let's see. And Daisuke, all you lucky people, says, Daisuke, do you have any insight into this film that you obtained by being Japanese that a foreigner might not be able to inherently understand due to translation limitations? There are a couple issues about that. I'll get to that in a second. Let's see. Just skipping around the comments here. Yeah, Jimmy says, I read that the suit was used for promotions. Yeah, you're talking about the second suit. Yes, that's correct. And in fact, I think it's also used again in a very memorable shot in Terror of Mechagodzilla. But that's for another discussion. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, there's discussion here about the callbacks to older films. Let's see here. Jared says, pointing the gun at his chin was quite humorous. I agree. Yeah, JR62, Godzilla movies in general copy the pop culture of the day, like wrestling, tag team, and boxing, elite James Bond movie types. Yes and no, because I would say yes, it does, but no on the other hand, because this is its own genre of films. And so it's not a carbon copy of James Bond. It borrows elements, but it's certainly not a carbon copy of James Bond, that's for sure. That's my own view anyway. Let's see. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay, great. Okay, so I will continue then with that, and you please continue with the conversation. But so where was I? So let's see. Let me talk about this. Okay, so let me now talk about the human characters of the film, and let's see if we can have a little discussion about that. And then I will try to talk about some of the filmmakers behind this film to the best of my ability, and then we'll go from there. So I mentioned here that we have the. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, I have to finish my kaiju conversation about Mechagodzilla and Godzilla, and then King Caesar, of course. So the final fight between Godzilla and King Caesar on the one hand, and Mechagodzilla on the other hand. Okay, so remember, King Caesar was awakened by Nami who has the ancestry heritage of the House of Azumi, which has this linkage to Okinawan folklore. So there's her, and there's her grandfather, who's apparently the high priest. And so, according to the grandfather, only a descendant of the House of Azumi, right, can awaken King Caesar from his sleep. And so that's where we get the famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, of the song that she sings to awaken Godzilla. It's quite a long song. It's not one. It's one bar. It's two phrases and the chorus twice, I think. So it's a full song, I think. And so that's a lot. And I love how you can't. It's hard to do much with a song when someone is singing. You just have to show the person singing and just cut to Caesar, cut to people's faces, and then cut back to the singing. There's one shot in particular in that song where it's swelling to it's a particular a height in the middle of the song when she says, King Caesar, and then we see people move as they're watching. Some people move in. They're in frame and they come back and they leave, and then the camera falls and then the faces line up almost perfectly. Even Tamura, who just is this random Interpol agent, becomes part of the drama, which is really great. But apparently only a descendant of the Azumi clan can awaken King Caesar from his sleep. So I always thought in my head it would have been nice. Why does it have to be Nami? I mean, it would have been interesting to see what the grandfather might have done with that particular song. It would have been interesting to see him try to sing it. That's anyway. But the point is that he or she awakens King Caesar just in time, just as Mechagodzilla is approaching. Because the attack begins at 6 o'clock, of course. And so, and King Caesar has an interesting fight style, right? Because he has this thing with his eye, and right, because for whatever reason, Mechagodzilla doesn't use his finger missiles at first. Mechagodzilla uses his eye beams at first to try to attack King Caesar, and I'm not quite sure why he did that first. Why didn't he use his finger missiles or something like that? I can only assume that perhaps his finger missiles, they seem rather plentiful. He seems to have a lot of finger missiles ready to shoot, right? Because they're just unloading at the final battle, but maybe they are still of a finite number, and so maybe he wants to use his eye beams, which maybe have maybe a more renewable source of energy. I don't know, I'm purely speculating here. But the fact that he uses his eye beams first is really at his disadvantage, because it shows that King Caesar has his ability with his own eyes. It comes into his right eye and it shoots out of his left eye, so he's able to deflect and use the power to his advantage. And he does so at the start of the fight quite well, if you recall. But I think there's a point where Mechagodzilla seems to understand how to change his strategy, and he does. At first, there's a deflection from King Caesar, but Mechagodzilla ducks just in time. And then that's when Mechagodzilla decides to use his finger missiles to try to attack King Caesar. And that's when King Caesar, all the way up to then, he's been quite an aggressive fighter. He's been going quite directly at Mechagodzilla. But here is the first point where King Caesar almost shows his... I don't want to... cowardice is probably too strong a word, but it's very funny to see how quickly King Caesar decides to run behind the rock. And then Mechagodzilla then opens the thing with his chest, and he uses that electric bolt from his chest. Well, I don't know why he uses his eyes, I'm not sure, but he uses the chest bolt to cut the mountain in half, and then revealing King Caesar's location, then starts to go to work on him. Just before Godzilla comes, just in the nick of time, of course. But I love how King Caesar seems to be very much an aggressive. I don't know how experienced he is as fighting, because he always tries to go for the direct line rather than try to find an alternative side route towards his enemy, if you know what I mean. He seems to be too direct, which leads to his basically opening up his weaknesses. And in fact, he's not quite useful until the very end, when Godzilla has Mechagodzilla in his grip. And that's when he sort of re-enters the fight in a more active way. So it's really, I'm not sure how effective King Caesar is as a fighter. Perhaps this was maybe his first fight after being asleep for such a long time, so maybe we can give him a little bit of slack here, of course. But it's an interesting dynamic that he shows. It's interesting too because all the way through the movie, King Caesar has been built up as being this mysterious thing. The aliens must they must capture the statue in order to prevent King Caesar from being awakened and stuff. So he's been given a lot of loft and a lot of hype all the way through, but then he comes in and he's a little bit, it's almost endearing just how overly eager King Caesar is to fight. And I think perhaps King Caesar maybe showed his hand a little bit too early with his eye thing. Maybe if he had left that defense to maybe later on in the fight, maybe it would have been a more productive one. He just went straight for the kill, as it were. But maybe at the same time, Mechagodzilla put up too much of a strong defense in order for him to, he had to use his strongest asset, as it were, at the very get-go. But anyway, that's King Caesar, of course, for you. But what was I saying? So let me just go into the human characters now, which is we have so many characters in this film, and perhaps too many to count. But we have the main character of Keisuke Shimizu, who is this architect slash martial artist slash sort of, I don't know, all-round like action star. And he's great. I mean, I say that maybe it sounds kind of jokingly, of course, but he really holds his own. When the mustached alien guy comes in for the first time, when he's at Professor Wagura's house, and there's this first fight as well. There's the whole thing, and there's a gun and stuff, and Professor Wagura is just standing there. What can I do? What can I do? But Keisuke is really holding his own and really defending himself, and he's got that great, that brown turtleneck, I think, and it's really quite wonderful, and I love him as a character. And the way he's driving too, there's a scene where he's trying to drive to the place, I think it's Gotemba, where Godzilla is fighting Anguirus, and he's driving in his Toyota, and he does this thing, the wonderful movie driving with the driving steering wheel. I love that so much. And also he's very no nonsense as well. Saeko Kanagusku, who is the I think from the university, and she's the expert in terms of the interpreting the prophecy and the archaeological dig and King Caesar and the artifact, etc. Well, there's kind of an interesting thing that happens with their relationship in this film, in that one might expect that there would be a kind of blossoming romance that could happen between the two of them. And in fact, the Interpol agent Nambara on the Queen Coral Ferry kind of makes a little bit of a joke about this when they seize them at night. After the alien, the half-faced alien has fallen to his death, Nambara sort of makes a joke about how it's nighttime is for lovers or something like that, and so there could have been something that could have been done with the Shimizu character and the Sayako character. But ultimately there was no romance between the two of them, which is an interesting choice of the narrative. Nothing, absolutely nothing. They're no nonsense, strictly business. And in fact, it's so funny, after Keisuke has been fighting with the guy on the ship, and he's about to die, and then suddenly, for no reason, the alien gets shot from somewhere, and then he falls over. So he's been in this huge fight, and then Sayako comes in running towards Keisuke, and you know what the first thing she says? She doesn't say, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" or something. No. What happened to the statue or something like that? It fell over. So she doesn't care about Keisuke. She only asks about him afterwards. After all this stuff happens, she then knows, "Oh, you're bleeding. Let me tie it up for you." That's really quite an interesting way that Sayako treats Keisuke. But I suppose he kind of deserves it, because he does exhibit a little bit of kind of oddity. I think the point where he almost exhibits almost like a stalkerish quality, if you will, maybe unintentionally so, but there's that scene where he he shares the taxi with Sayako because Sayako is going to visit Professor Wagura in Tokyo, and he says, "Oh, I get off here too," or something like that. And she's like, "What? Why are you getting off? Why are you getting off here? This, when we shared a taxi, this is really kind of." And she always has this look on her face like, "This is really creepy." It's only after the fact that she and we understand that in fact Keisuke is related to Professor Wagura, and so that's why he's been visiting Tokyo to visit Professor Wagura. So it's a huge coincidence. But I wouldn't be surprised if that really turned off Sayako to Keisuke and anything that she might have felt about him otherwise, because he kind of put one over on her. In fact, it happened again the second time on the Queen Coral with the statue. Right? He never told her that the real statue was kept in a safe in the captain's room or whatever. He never told her that. He never told us that. And so he's just, all happy and smiles when they walk off the boat in Okinawa. It's like, oh yeah, I know how to handle myself. That sort of. My goodness. He lies to her and puts the wool over her eyes unnecessarily twice. So it's not surprising that perhaps there isn't any romantic relationship that occurs between the two of them, at least during the film. But anyway, that's all said in jest, of course, because I really enjoy his character and her character as well. But it's interesting also how the Sayako character is used in this film in a very interesting way. She is an intellectual. She is an academic. And she never loses sight of that. She never becomes like a damsel in distress, as it were. She never, she never is kidnapped or anything like that. She always maintains her kind of quest or seeking truth or knowledge throughout the entire film. And I think that's an interesting choice. It could have been very easy to turn her into a sort of damsel in distress type of character, and then Shimizu has to come in and rescue her. But in fact, that doesn't happen. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons why I think this is not a straight up James Bond copy, if you will. It does feel like that, but at the same time, she is not a sort of James Bond female character in that sense. And I really respect that, actually. I think that's a really interesting choice. One might lose something in terms of a human dramatic quality of the film that might be lost, but it's made in favor of this kind of trying to maintain I think a very interesting character that is Sayako Kanagusku. Incidentally, before I continue, the name of her character is Sayako Kanagusku. It is not Sayako Kaneshiro. I've noticed in sort of online sites and also this Criterion book, and also, in fact, the Criterion website, criterion.com, has this film, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and it still has her name, character being Sayako Kanagusku. Her name is mentioned here as being Sayako Kaneshiro. That is not correct. Her name is Sayako Kanagusku. Her character introduces herself as Sayako Kanagusku. The Blu-ray commentary makes note of the fact that Kanagusku is sort of a unique way of reading the Japanese kanji characters of her name. It's kind of an Okinawa type of name. That's how it's described in the commentary. And so if we understand that maybe she is from Okinawa herself, then that might make some sense. But again, we don't know too much about that, except we know that her name is Sayako Kanagusku. So that's probably one thing that it might get lost in translation, if you will. But it's very clear in the Japanese version that her name is Sayako Kanagusku. Okay, the other characters so there's also his Keisuke's brother, Masahiko, and he's very interesting too, right? Because he seems to be younger than Keisuke. And he's at the beginning with the photos, and he's exploring the cave in Okinawa, and he's the first one to find that little chip of metal and all that. But then he becomes somewhat of a peripheral character, starting from the second half of the film. He gets captured, I think, twice. And And he doesn't aid directly in the breakout or rescue of any of those captures. I think most notably, if you recall, the second time he's captured by the aliens, which is at the final part of the film, he and Professor Miyajima and the officer, Interpol officer Nambara, are captured, and they're tied up in the alien sanctum at the very final fight. And remember, though, during the fight between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, Nambara and Miyajima are the ones who are trying to say, okay, I'm going to undo my cuffs. So, let's undo the pipe and throw them on both ends of the console. And so it's all between the two of them. Masahiko, poor kid, has nothing to do with the final breakout at all. He becomes quite ineffectual. In fact, there's a bit at the end when they're running away, and he's like, "Okay, let's get out of here." And then I think it's Number says, "Wait a minute," and he. There's a point where the film even shows Masahiko still in his handcuffs, and Number has to unlock the cuffs as they're walking up the steps and trying to escape as the building is about to explode. Poor Masahiko, he gets the short shrift here. So he becomes a rather ineffectual character at the end. I don't know if his character was really needed for purposes of this film in terms of the narrative thrust. But it's another face to add to the ensemble, I suppose. And in that sense, he doesn't, I don't think, distract or detract from the proceedings, because he's a very likable character, and he does serve the purpose, at least, of finding the piece of metal at the very beginning and then taking it to Professor Miyajima. So there's that. Speaking of Professor Miyajima, of course, he is the professor who is an expert in space metals, and he also has a very powerful pipe. I love that moment when he's introducing his pipe. Right? Remember, it's him and Sayako, and maybe, I think Masahiko's there as well, and then also Keisuke, right? They're there and they're discussing, this is, I think, after the first fight between Godzilla and Anguirus, and they're all discussing what to do, and Professor Miyajima says, I want to go see Godzilla for myself. Let's go fight him, or let's not fight him, let's go go to the place where he's going to appear next, or something like that. And they're all off and ready, and they're really excited, and then they stop, and then Keisuke, oh, this is a very interesting pipe. And he just takes his time and stops. Oh, why don't I tell you right now what this is? This is very interesting. This is like, Chekhov's pipe. And so it's really great. And it takes the film takes its time to show us the initials, HM, which I think will become very important. I think because later, the idea is later on, when Keisuke is in the cave, he will search around and actually find the pipe. And that will lead him. Apparently, I think on paper the idea was that the pipe he would recognize the pipe as being Miyajima's by the fact that it had the red initials on there, and that would be a way for him to know that in fact Miyajima is being captured by the aliens. But he really didn't need the pipe anyway, because he was captured by the alien there, and then Nambar came, so he would have gone into the place anyway without necessarily needing to know that, or needing to find the pipe by Miyajima. So why the pipe was needed there for a narrative necessity, I'm not quite sure. But the point is that the pipe becomes very important at the end, when it helps to affect the power console, and thus create the final diversion with the aliens at the end that will create the final battle, the pièce de résistance, as it were. But Miyajima is an interesting character, and I want to talk about him very quickly here. Oh gosh, we're good on time. Okay, and he's played by Akiko Hirata. And he is a very significant actor. Hirata is a very significant actor in the Godzilla series, because he has played many different types, secondary roles, primary roles, not heroes, but maybe good guys, or maybe not so good guys, some villains even. A whole plethora of roles in the past. And so to see him here is really quite stunning, because we're not quite sure, by virtue of the fact that it's Hirata who's playing Miyajima, we're not quite sure, or it's possible to look at the character of Miyajima and see a character that might have the potential of being ambivalent in terms of his allegiances in the film. He ends up being a very good character, really great character, but we're not quite sure. And in fact, I think there are a lot of subliminal points that are made in the film, maybe unintentionally, but there are some subliminal points that might lead us to think of the possibility that he might turn bad. Okay, what are some reasons here? Well, first of all, the fact that it's played by Hirata, and we think of the pedigree of his performances throughout the earlier Godzilla films, and later, of course. We see that he plays both heroes and villains. And so whenever we see him on the screen, we as Godzilla fans, Godzilla film fans, think, oh gosh, what will he play? Will he play a hero? Will he play a villain? And I think that kind of suspense, just by virtue of the fact that it's him playing the character, I think really goes a long way to add a sort of potential ambivalence to the character of Miyajima. There's also a sort of subtle visual cue. If you recall, the pipe had HM. I think his name is Hideto Miyajima, so HM. Those are the initials that were carved into the pipe that he has, which is metallic, silver metallic. It's interesting because the silver metallic color is, of course, reminiscent of the silver metallic color of Mechagodzilla. And what does Mechagodzilla have on his shoulder but a red sort of monogram, MG, right? All right, the aliens couldn't resist. I mean, they couldn't help themselves, right? They could have left well enough alone, but oh no, they had to show off, as it were, that this is Mechagodzilla, and we're going to show it by saying MG on the side there. But it's interesting because the monogram is in red, and it's almost like red initials on a silver metallic background. So it's very much a visual cue. Miyajima has one, and Mechagodzilla, of course, has one on his shoulder. So it's almost like a visual cue, almost perhaps as a possible association by visual cue that maybe Miyajima will end up being a bad guy. It doesn't turn out to be the case, of course, but that's an interesting visual cue. Another sort of cue, which is really interesting, as an interesting detail, is if you recall, when the group go to that, I think, harbor place, like a refinery harbor place, where they see the two Godzillas and they're fighting, and then they realize, excuse me, and then the Godzilla starts to lose his skin, and so we then cut to the human characters who are watching from the sidelines, and Miyajima is prominent in the foreground, and he says, yes, I got it. It's a cyborg. And that it's a cyborg made of the metal, and he says, he sort of speculates, I think it's more appropriate if we can call him Mechagodzilla. So he just makes up the name, or seems to make up the name on the spot, Mechagodzilla. Well, wouldn't you know it, that the aliens actually named the thing Mechagodzilla? How would Professor Miyajima have known to call it Mechagodzilla? How could he have known? I mean, it's a one in a million coincidence. Of course, I understand it's a film, and all that stuff, so this is probably a plot hole, right? But still, if we look at this as a kind of plot hole flaw, I think it really serves in an interesting indirect way as a charming point of the film, and it's another sort of possible cue as to maybe Professor Miyajima was more in cahoots with the alien race than we had first been led to believe. And that's probably why he had some inside information as to the real name of Mechagodzilla, as it were. It ended up becoming nothing, of course, because Miyajima was a really upright character. He even says at the point where he says, I sold my soul to the devil to help these aliens with the repairs of Mechagodzilla, even though it meant the saving of my daughter. I still must make amends. And so that's why he gets a final heroic boost and goes back into the lair a second time. So, but I love those little aspects of his character, Miyajima, and I think he's potentially a very ambiguous one, but he ends up being a really upright good guy. And then let's go to the Interpol agent Nambara, and he is the guy with the glasses, and he smokes on the airplane, and he's got the ring, and he first calls himself, like a kind of a hotshot freelance reporter and stuff. And then there's, he's wandering around. He's got sunglasses, and he's also seen to be as a bit a mysterious figure that's tailing these people. Well, wouldn't you know it? He's a good guy. He's an Interpol agent, and he's there to help Keisuke and the others. And in fact, he saves Keisuke's life I think a total of 3 times, right? And Keisuke even acknowledges this. So the first time was on the Queen Coral Ferry, the second time was in the cave, and the third time was with the car ignition. So Nambar is also a very resourceful figure, and it's really great to see his charm. He has that kind of look on his face that can be both a villain and a hero. And if you know other Toho tokusatsu horror films, you know Shin Kishida, the actor, will appear in other monster films. Bloodthirsty Trilogy, I think it's called in English. But he's got one of those interesting faces where he can be both a bad guy and a good guy. So I like that look of ambiguity. But incidentally, he is an Interpol agent who wears sunglasses even at night. And then there's the other Interpol agent who is Tamara with the really bright white jacket. Who also wear sunglasses. So we see these sunglassed figures who seem rather ominous at the beginning, but then they turn out to be the good guys. Whereas the bad guys, who are also tailing these people, they never wear sunglasses. So in this film, anyone who wears sunglasses ends up being a good guy. So that's probably another visual cue. Let's see. Oh, and then of course, hold on, I just lost my train of thought. Let's see. I lost my train of thought. So let me now go to the chat and we can go from there. Let's see. Okay. Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. This is what I remembered. So going back to the idea of the lack of a romantic relationship between Keisuke and Sayako, one of the things I was speculating about with respect to this is, if we recall that this film is again part of the Toho Champion Festival, it might have been that, and this is my first speculation, maybe it was because, this film is being made for kids, therefore, if we're thinking about the adolescent audience, then maybe we can't necessarily put in a romantic relationship between the female lead and the male lead of the film. Maybe it was something to do with that, I don't know. But at the same time, we did see some romantic relationships between characters in other Godzilla films. Invasion of Astro Monster comes to mind. Terror of Mechagodzilla comes to mind most prominently, and that's only 1 year later than this. And so, I'm still quite intrigued by that choice. And maybe, I think it probably has to do with just the narrative necessity. There are so many characters in the film and maybe so little time to devote. I think if we tried to fit in another romantic story here or romantic angle to the characters, it would have just been too much information overload. It would have been better to cut out more other characters that maybe weren't necessary to the plot itself. But that was another thing that I was thinking about, but oh well. Oh, and also, again, I'm sorry about this, but one other thing before I go to the chat. The Okinawa folklore mysticism element, I love how it's sort of hinted at, but not really. And there is this idea of the mystery involving the Shisa statue, of course, and all that. But also Nami, the wonderfully talented singer, right, Nami, who is also a very beautiful, elegant dancer, a folklore dancer, or folk dancer. She also seems to have visions, right? She has visions, apparently very powerful visions. So powerful, in fact, that she can see beyond what's actually going to be depicted in this film, right? Because if you know Godzilla films or tokusatsu films, you know that some of the things that she sees are, in fact, shots from films that are not Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. But so her visions are so powerful they extend beyond the film. But she seems to see visions, but then that part of the storyline is never again played up ever again. And that can be seen as a bad thing, but actually I think it's also a good thing because it also keeps an air of mystery. No matter how maybe fragmented, no matter how seemingly childish to certain audiences perhaps, it still is undeniable that there is this level of mystery and a sort of inscrutableness that things are left unexplained or never re-explored or re-examined. And I think ultimately that does give the film some cover and it does protect the film because it gives us this air of sort of impenetrability that seems to be placed there on purpose. And I think that that plays to the film's strength, as it were. And therefore, it means that the film doesn't have to spend a lot of time to explain all the nitty-gritty details of something. So it doesn't, in other words, for example, it doesn't have to explain all the stuff about the specifics of the ancestry of the Azumi house and Nami and King Caesar. We just go with it, and then there's that. It also doesn't have to stop and explain the whole thing with Godzilla and the electricity that I mentioned earlier in this video. We can just go with it and go from there. So I think while it might seem to be overly rushed narrative, I think another way to look at it is that it helps the film. It gives the film an edge. It doesn't have to explain. It just gives us enough, but then leaves the air of mystery, which gives the film enough cover to go on with the narrative the way it wants to go on. So that's how I think it really operates quite strikingly well, depending on one's point of view of the film. Okay, let's see here. So going back to the let's see. All right, just keep going in the. Let's see here. Okay, I am skipping around some comments. So if I skipped around your comment, if I skipped over your comment, please accept my apologies. Yeah, let's see. Jared says, yeah, Godzilla never giving up is always exciting to watch. It always gives a good feeling. Yeah, he never gives up. He never gives up. Even when the going gets tough, he never gives up. And that is a great feeling. Imantol is here. Hello, Manos. It's nice to see you. I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, great. It's nice to see you. Jimmy says, what was your favorite part of the movie? My favorite, I have so many, but probably the final fight is really great. No, actually, no, I take that back. The coolest part, I mean, the final fight is great, but it's the Mechagodzilla reveal. And then boom, and then the Masaru Sato music kicks in, and we see all the close-ups and the twirling of the hands, and then the opening and closing of the jaw. Oh, that is to me the best. That is the greatest, that is, I think, the greatest kaiju reveal. I think it's probably better than the reveal of the original Godzilla monster in the 1954 film. Please don't hate me for that, but it is such a cool reveal. That is probably my favorite part. And actually, speaking of which, though, my favorite part also, maybe if I can name two, is the music. The Masaru Sato music is so cool. Masaru Sato is one of the composers of the Godzilla films. He's not the most prominent or probably most famous in terms of Godzilla composers, of course. That goes to that honor goes to Ifukube, of course. But here, Masaru Sato is giving us. Well, let me say first of all that Masaru Sato has made scores of other Godzilla films, but I think there's something quite charged about this that makes this score, I think, one of the best in the series. And in fact, it really gives Masaru Sato a claim to, a lot of fame, at least in terms of Godzilla soundtracks. This is, Sato is known also for making the soundtracks to other films. Probably the one that some of you might know is the music for a lot of Kurosawa films. And if you know, for example, the film by Kurosawa called Yojimbo. Yojimbo has a kind of it's like a tractor kind of beat to it. Well, this has that similar kind of tractor kind of beat to it, like dum dum ba bum bum, right? It has that thumping propulsion about it that is, I think, very reminiscent actually of Yojimbo. But there's something really cool about this, and the way that the strings are employed and the horns are used and all that. It really, and I'm talking about the main theme, the attack theme or the fight themes. Those aren't the only themes, of course, in the film. There are also some lovely Okinawan themes or Okinawan type themes. There is the main sort of ballad type of theme, not quite a love theme because there isn't really a love story of the film, but it's sort of the calmer theme that opens the film over the opening credits and the closing credits as we see Nami run quite happily down the steps and the camera goes up to the Shisa statue above the entranceway there. And so there are some really lovely cues here, but I think that thumping noise fight theme is one of my favorites, and I listen to that theme quite regularly, and I love it very much. So that Masaru Sato theme is quite excellent. I'm pressed for time, so before I go to the chat, while I was talking about Masaru Sato, I should speak also about the filmmakers behind this. Okay, Jun Fukuda is the director of this. Jun Fukuda. If you don't know Jun Fukuda, please remember the name Jun Fukuda, because in Godzilla lore and Godzilla film, the Godzilla films, the director that's cited the most, and quite rightly so, is the director Ishiro Honda. So Honda is the director that has made the most Godzilla films in the Showa era. He is the director that has given the most directorial imprint to the Godzilla series. Don't get me wrong. So Honda's work is irreplaceable. That being said, Fukuda is a director that has done a number of Godzilla films in the past, including, of course, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. He has some films that might be considered to be like overly campy, cheesy kids films. Maybe Godzilla vs. Megalon comes to mind, perhaps. But this film is one of the strongest in the series. It in my mind, is my favorite of the Showa era films. And that, I think, and the fact that he can make this film, which has a kind of maybe action-adventure, dark tone to it, and he can also make quote-unquote kids films like Godzilla vs. Megalon or something like that, I think shows a real breadth of artistic reach and style and capability that is so worth mentioning. And so therefore, please remember Jun Fukuda. Okay, once again, the name is Jun Fukuda. So please remember the director's name, Fukuda. It's very, very important. And also, I have to mention the special effects, Teruyoshi Nakano. Okay, so this is very important. So Teruyoshi Nakano is the director of the special effects here. And so, this is, as I said before, the 60s Godzilla films, starting, and actually the 50s and 60s Godzilla films, the special effects were done by the very, very famous Tsuburaya. So famous in the tokusatsu world, in Toho world, one of the most famous figures. And so his work, Tsuburaya's work, is, I think, unparalleled, and it's historically significant. Okay, but Nakano's work here, and in his sort of reign, as it were, is so important. And one of the reasons why is he introduces quote-unquote modern elements to the fight styles and the like. His fights are much more bloody and much more violent, as I alluded to earlier. Also, there is a kind of straight-on approach. There is more of a design change to the Godzilla suits, etc., and the like. But please remember Nakano and his role as a special effects director here. Very important, very, very important indeed. And we should also mention that the suit actors for the monsters here are very important. So this is for Godzilla. We have the actor is Isao Zushi. And we have Mechagodzilla, Kazunari Mori, and then we have King Caesar, Kinichi Kusumi. And Kusumi also plays Anguirus. It's very interesting, if you recall, that the opening credits actually mention these three suit actors and the roles that they play. So that's an interesting development that occurs with the opening credits, the mentioning of the suit actors as well. But I love the acting here of these of the suit actors here, the monster actors, because there is a lot of personality that comes through. There's always been personality that comes through in all the suit acting in the Godzilla films, don't get me wrong. But if we're talking about this film, there's a lot of, how should I put it, movement with the there, and even with the simplest gestures, there's a lot of attitude. Recall, I love this gesture where the fake Godzilla is fighting Anguirus, and he brushes off part of whatever it is, dust from his chest. He does that thing like this. What a great moment. There's also, of course, the moment with the final battle and the real Godzilla turning into a magnet, and he does that thing with his arms and does this. Again, fist-pumping moment, if ever there was one, but that's also a great moment. Incidentally, it's great to see, if you look closely at Godzilla's hand, his fingers, part of the stub of one of his fingers seems to be kind of about to fall off. It's really quite amusing, but it also adds to the kind of charm of Godzilla. I always think of that as being, Godzilla's been so damaged by Mechagodzilla that the stub of the top of his finger is about to fall off or something like that. But there's a kind of frenetic energy with the King Caesar performance. There's also a stiff, rigid, almost over-eagerness or cockiness when it comes to the Mechagodzilla performance. And then there is and then I love the bit where Godzilla does his fire breath and then it misses, and he does that thing like, oh gosh, I missed, that little moment. Maybe I'll get him next time, that sort of thing. He almost snaps his fingers or something. I love those moments. They add a bit of, shall I say, humanity to the role, and it's almost like, maybe it's easy to look down upon the suit acting from a certain point of view, but I would actually suggest that there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of talent that is needed in order to convey the information that needs to be conveyed in these monster fights. And to me, it reminds me a lot of, actually it reminds me a lot of dance. It also reminds me of kabuki, Japanese, sort of a Japanese type of theater style called kabuki style. And so there is a lot to do with movement and facial expressions and makeup that hide the real visage of the performer. Well, I think the same is true for the suit acting here and in all other Godzilla films, but this film notwithstanding, this has some really great suit acting moments, and I really want to acknowledge that here. Okay, so let's see. Let me go to the comments, and we shall go from there. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. All right, I've skipped around so many comments here, so if I skipped your comment, please forgive me, but I'm just doing the best I can here. And it is almost approaching 2 hours, and it's almost 1 a.m. here, so I think I'm gonna start to wind down, but I will try to address your comments here as much as possible. Okay, Alex, okay, yeah, Jimmy says, I like the statue fake out. You're talking about the statue fake out on the ferry there. Yeah, Shimizu was the man. He kind of knew, he was one step ahead of everyone. Yeah, Alex says the whole thing with the statue can be kind of confusing and gimmicky at times, but I love it. I agree. And then Jared says the characters are all pretty good and likable, as Jimmy said earlier. Altoran Kaiju says no trust, no relationship. Yeah, I enjoy this more friendship aspect than lover relationship to her character. You're talking about Sayako Kanegusku and her relationship with Keisuke. And then JR62 follows up, yeah, the lover thing is way overdone in movies anyway. Yes, I agree. And so this is a nice, refreshing take on that otherwise overdone aspect of many films. Let's see. Gray says there's no truer foundation for friendship than a shared love for Daisuke's channel. That's very kind. Thank you. Alex says the way Fukuda, the director Jun Fukuda, shoots the cave in Okinawa is really stylish and interesting. Yes, very much so. Apparently, according to the commentary here, according to Nakano, it was that during the time that they were shooting that, it was on location. It was apparently very hot outside, and it was in Okinawa, which also has a very high temperature to begin with. But when they went to the cave, it was very, very cold, according to Nakano. They had to wear their coats or something like that. So very interesting. Let's see. Jimmy goes on. The agents were very funny. Nambara and Tamura. I love Tamura's the second agent. His white coat. It's so white. Like, you'd think if you're going to be an Interpol agent, you'd want to wear clothing that would help you blend in. Not Tamura. He's wearing a coat that says, "Hey world, look at me. I'm wearing a white coat." That sort of thing. And I love the other Nambara, the mysterious figure at the beginning. We see him sort of following Sayako rather mysteriously, so we don't quite know what he's doing. And then there's a huge close-up of his ring, right? And then it cuts to a sound of a screeching airplane or something like that. But the ring seems to play no purpose, absolutely no purpose, until the very end of the film, where he uses the ring when he's tied up there and flattens it and uses it in a way to pick at the lock and to break free from his confines, as it were. So in fact, the ring, which was given a huge close-up at the beginning, for whatever reason, I had no idea until the very end. So talk about a setup that doesn't pay off until way, way later in the film. I love it. I absolutely love it. Okay. Let's see. And then Jared says, speaking of which, gotta wear the sunglasses at night no matter what time of day it is. Yes. Cephaloclad. Hello. I always hope I get those pronunciations correct, but I hope I did. David Griffin is here. Hello, my friend. Let's see. And Iacona 23. Let's see. Yes, Iacona 23. Yes, I thought that there was an implied mutual romantic interest. Perhaps, although if there could have been something, it could have happened on the ferry, but nothing happened. In fact, there's a moment between Sayako and Keisuke when they're having dinner, if you recall, and it has that nice, almost romantic jazz music overlaid. And the only thing that Keisuke can say is he's eating, and he doesn't even bother to try to compliment her. "Oh, you look nice." He's just really into his food, right? He's just really hungry. And then the only thing he can muster up saying is, I feel like we're being watched. And it's like, oh, really? And that's it, If he had his chance, I think that was his chance. He could have said something, try to compliment her in some way, maybe have a conversation. But no, he was too hungry and all that. But, oh well, c'est la vie, I suppose. C'est la vie. Dory the Hobbit is here. Hello, how are you doing? You're the Daisuke, you're the man. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Pete 1972 is here. I hope you're well. And then Iacona 23 says the music was outstanding. Yes, I agree. That was the best part of the movie, you say, along with the attractive women. Great musical score. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I agree, but the score is fantastic. And then let's see. Gosh. I love the score, and I listen to the score quite often, in fact, and I listen to. It's not the version that was used in the film, but it's the version. It's sort of the studio recording version of the song that Princess Nami sings. It's called what is it called? Miyarabi's Prayer. And there you can listen to. I think you can find it on iTunes or something like that. But it's not the actual recording that's used in the film. But it's a studio recording, I think. So it sounds a little bit different, but it's still great to listen to. Really, really love that song. I do love it very much. Let's see. Let's see. Peanut B Hello, is this live? Yes, it is. Um, yes, Alteron Kaiju says Nakajima will always be Godzilla. You're talking about the original suit actor, of course, but this performance is extremely fantastic. I completely agree. Yes, so what I wanted to say, and I hope I made myself clear, is even though we have many different people behind the camera that were different from the quote unquote original architects of the original 50s and 60s Godzilla era, we still have a great film. And in fact, I say everyone is different. Of course, there is the one uniting figure in this, which is the producer, right, Tomoyuki Tanaka. He is still the constant here. He is, of course, probably one of the, if not the important figure in the Toho Tokusatsu era during the Showa period, definitely in the Godzilla Showa period era. So he is still the constant here. But the director is different, of course, the musical score and the suit actor and all this stuff, and the special effects director, as well as other key roles, of course. But still, despite that, what we end up here is a film that I think rivals the other films quite magnificently. And in my eyes and in my heart, I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, it is my favorite Godzilla film from the Showa era. My favorite. So incredibly entertaining. Warts and all, it is incredibly entertaining. And what I said during this video is I think even its so-called warts help to create not blemishes, but real marks of beauty, charming points, if you will. So really, really great. Yes, and Jared says the suit acting was very unique and added a lot to the monsters. I agree. Peanut B says this movie always reminded me of Ultraman. Loved that as a kid. Yes. David Griffin says, I'm watching the movie as the chat proceeds, and the suit actors do a good job at characterization. Yes, I'm glad you've mentioned that. Icon23 says, King Caesar playing peekaboo with Mechagodzilla and tried to hide from behind the mountain was hilarious. Yes, yes. And Mechagodzilla will have none of that, and he just cuts the thing in half with his chest beam. I love it. I absolutely love it. And that's, I think, is that... The chest beam, is that the first time that the chest beam is shown in the film, right? Because I just want to be clear. The first fight with Anguirus, he doesn't show any of the weapons. It's just him fighting, not even the breath. Then the fight when he confronts Godzilla at the Tokyo Bay Area, he has, when he's hidden in Godzilla, he has the yellow breath, but then when he's revealed as Mechagodzilla, he doesn't use the yellow breath anymore. He uses the eye beams, and then he uses the rockets. And there's, in fact, a very famous moment I forgot to mention. His eye beam locks with Godzilla's breath. Now, I want to say that this is the first time that we see a kaiju battle where two monsters lock their sort of breath rays at the same time, and it locks in the middle and explodes, and it causes both of them to get propelled back. I think that's the first time we see that in a Godzilla film. So if I'm correct about that, and I think I am, then that is a unique moment in Godzilla's Showa film history, of course. But there's that, and then it's when we see Mechagodzilla start to fight King Caesar, then we start to see more of the weapons revealed. First, he uses the I-beam that doesn't do any good. Then he uses the rockets, and then he opens his chest with the beam. So I think that's the first time we see the chest beam. And then later with the fight, as the fight escalates against Godzilla when he comes in, then he does this thing with his neck. He turns around with his neck only, and then he does the thing spinning shield with his neck, which is so cool. It comes out of nowhere, although it's quite useless, in fact, because it means that he has to remain stationary. He can't move. But I suppose it's okay because he's protected. Although there's no shield from above, so you could have thought maybe Godzilla might have been able to propel something from up and down in order to hit Mechagodzilla on the head. But oh well. And then after that, we see the final onslaught with Mechagodzilla. We can see that he flies. We can see that he has seemingly unlimited rockets from his fingers, finger missiles, his knees and his feet, his toes, and also his eye beams, etc. Just goes completely just bonkers at the end there with his arsenal. And in fact, Nakano in the commentary made a very interesting point. He said when they're thinking about the design of Mechagodzilla, he says he was thinking about making a monster that was, his entire body was like a weapon. Every part of his body was like a weapon. So I think that is really made actualized when we see the final design that was used for Mechagodzilla in this film. Absolutely brilliant. One of the best design works of any monster kaiju ever. And in fact, we see Mechagodzilla as a character in later films, of course. Of course, there's Terror of Mechagodzilla a year later. But there are other films that we see much, much later where the design has been it's been upgraded, or it's been redesigned or refinished, etc., to give it a more sleek, modern look. But there's something really quite charming about this rugged, sharp-angled look of Mechagodzilla in this first film. It has a nice, almost retro, almost steampunk quality to it, and I really love this initial design of Mechagodzilla. But oh well, let's see. Okay. Yes. Yeah, Alex says, with the budgetary limits that were put on the later Showa films, Mechagodzilla is a gem. Yes, this is the point in the film series where the films are obviously starting to experience a decline in box office, and therefore budgets were also shrinking. And that's true for this film as well. And so I think that explains why they had to use a traveling Godzilla suit instead of making a new one, a second one for the Godzilla disguise, when there are two Godzillas on screen. I think it also explains the fact that we have all these human characters, but it's weird. The human world there are no police in this world. There are no military in this world. It seems like all the people that exist are just these characters and no one else. We see some people on the boat. We see some people on the plane, but we see some people at the cave at the beginning, but that's basically it. All the people that exist in this world are just the characters that we know, and no one else. And so there are no bystanders. We don't see anyone, any victims of the city attack, or we don't see anything like that. It's just basically unpopulated except for the characters that we know. So I think that has also to do with the fact that we're dealing with a limited budget and we can't go too far. And also I think that also might explain maybe the lack of inclusion of other adversary kaiju like Gigan, etc. But still, this film did its best with what it had in the limited resources that it had, and I think it exceeded everyone's expectation. And it certainly is a brilliant example of the Godzilla Showa era films. That's for sure. Let's see here. Peanut B, are we strictly talking about Ultraman? It's not Ultraman. It's we're talking about Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla here. Yeah, so I'm gonna limit my comments to Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. If you want to talk to others about other films, you're welcome to do so. But for me, I'm just going to talk about Mechagodzilla here. But if you want to ask me a question, you can do so in a comment or on another video, of course. Anytime, my friend, anytime. Iconus says, the most hilarious part was when the guy came to the home to steal the statue, and a preposterous fight drags on, and the nephew is getting his eyes gouged out, and his uncle is doing nothing. Thanks, uncle. Yeah, I suppose so, but remember, yeah, that's Professor Wagura. But remember also, Professor Wagura is played by Hiroshi Koizumi, the actor Hiroshi Koizumi. And Hiroshi Koizumi is really very famous in the Godzilla world, right? He's been in many, many earlier Godzilla films, and he will also appear in other Godzilla films after this, in fact. And so his face is very recognizable, and he's also a way in which this film links back to the past of Godzilla. I should mention the captain of the ferry, the Queen Coral Ferry, is played by Kenji Sahara, and he's also an actor that appeared in past Godzilla films, and so his role here is very, very brief as the captain, but he would have been recognized by any Godzilla, anyone who knows the other Godzilla films. And so I think for me, the fact that Professor Wagura, played by Koizumi, is so ineffective in terms of when his own nephew is being attacked, I think I can kind of forgive that because he's such an important actor in the other Godzilla films. I can kind of forget that. Maybe he was sort of caught off guard. And in fact, his character really appears in the first time. He just does nothing. He never appears again in the second half of the film ever. So it would have been nice to see him emerge, maybe working side by side with Akiko Hirata, the Miyajima character. So it would have been nice, the two professors working side by side to try to bring down the foes that were the black hole aliens. But oh well, it wasn't meant to be. Yeah, it wasn't meant to be. Okay, let's see here. Altron Kaiju, there seemed to be an element of traditional versus new futuristic. Anyway, take care, Daisuke. Hope you visit another Godzilla film. It was fun and brought up a few new aspects. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, and I do agree. Yes, the traditional versus the new futuristic. That's an interesting way of putting it, my friend. I agree with you. Although the new futuristic, I would say, has a kind of, I mean, there are elements of the modern Japan, contemporary modern Japan of this. The Queen Coral Ferry is one example. The car that Keisuke drives, I think it's Toyota 2000 GT, I think. I'm not a car guy, but there's a 2000 GT logo on the grille when you see the car parked, and so I assume that's a Toyota. That model, contemporary model in the early 70s. There's also the Sony radio cassette player with the red cassette in there that you can see in the background as Keisuke is on his bed reading when he's visiting Professor Wagura. Right, there are other aspects like that I think give a sense of the actual modern in that time, 1973, 1974, as well as the ultra futuristic sci-fi stuff that we see, ultra stylized in the form of the aliens and the alien race and the costumes, and also the design of Mechagodzilla, of course. But it's all, I think it's there in the real and the unreal, if you know what I mean, in terms of the futuristic or the modern. And then the traditional, of course, I think is exemplified most obviously and strikingly by the Okinawa element. Let's see. Jared says, this was a fun film. I enjoyed viewing. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Pete 1972 says, I must check these films out sooner or later. Need to get the Criterion box set one day. Yes, I agree. But, you can watch this film. You don't need the Criterion Blu-ray set in order to be able to watch this. I think if you can, I'm not sure if you have access to streaming services, but if so, I think this is available on the Criterion channel. I don't know. I don't have that, but there are other ways to see it, of course. But Dinobot Curious says, "Am I too late?" I'm about to leave because it's after 1 a.m. But it's better late than never, I suppose. And we're still here, so welcome. Greetings from Tokyo. Let's see. Alex says, the scream that the mustached alien lets out when falling from the window is personally the funniest moment to me. Yeah, he does have, it's not really him falling, it's a dummy, right? It's obviously a dummy falling, so, that's really great. I love also, it's another one of those fake outs in the film, right? He's about to get shot and then someone else shoots him, it just falls over. It's like, I love how all this stuff, this unexpected stuff that never gets explained until much later in the film happens. Nambara does that. Like, Nambara and Keisuke are two guys who really love to pull the wool over the film, the audience's eyes. They really love to sort of take care of things behind the scenes and not really let anyone know what they're doing, and then they will reveal later on to us and to the characters what they actually did. So I really love that. Very much so. But Gray Rainbow is talking about the Buddhist trilogy, I'm actually thinking of talking about that in a separate video one day. I don't know when, but not. I don't have any plans, but I do know that trilogy very, very. I not know it well, but I've seen it many, many times, many, many times. In fact, I have a lot to say about that. But let's see, maybe one day. Dinobot Kirio says, let's see, just say now I enjoyed this film, showed it to my drama class in 7th grade, and most of them liked it. I liked the score and Mechagodzilla's design and personality. I actually prefer the sequel, this Terror of Mechagodzilla. That is another hill of beans. That is a film that is completely different in tone and focus, and it goes in a very interesting direction. It takes the Mechagodzilla lore and twists it in a way that is quite unusual for a Godzilla film. And it would be so nice for me if I were able to talk about that film, Terror of Mechagodzilla. Maybe one day in the future I can, to complete my Mechagodzilla discussion. But for those of you who are interested, who enjoyed this film, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, I think the next place for you to visit should be Terror of Mechagodzilla. That is a very unique film. It is different, so there is the possibility that if you really, really liked this film, you might not necessarily take to Terror of Mechagodzilla in the same way. However, the opposite might be true. If you are not such a big fan of this and you watch Terror of Mechagodzilla, you might find that film to be more entertaining for you. Or, yet another possibility is you like both this and this in equal measure. Or, another possibility is you don't like this and you don't like Terror of Mechagodzilla. I think all the possible combinations are there. But be that as it may, anyone who has seen this film and at least found it somewhat entertaining, if not more, I recommend that you check out Terror of Mechagodzilla if you have not done so already. It's really great. I think it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But for me, the thrill of my childhood comes back every time whenever I put this in the player and I press play. Every single time. It never ceases to entertain me and make me happy. Even it goes all over the place. Still, I love every moment of this. And it's to the point where perhaps I love it too much. And I see its flaws as being its strengths. And I see that as being a way for me to almost, in a way, I want to protect it, if you will, from any kind of criticism that might be launched at it. And I know that I've heard many people I've talked to criticize this during conversations, and I try to sort of bite my lip and try to resist just trying to defend this film as much as I can. But today I was saving up all that for today. I really wanted to express to you, my friends, how much I enjoy this film, and I also wanted to express to you my hope that even to some degree, hopefully, you feel the same way. In other words, hopefully this film entertained you, it made you laugh, it thrilled you, it made you want to stick around to see what was going to happen next, and that sort of thing. And if that's the case, my friends, then I think this film has succeeded in its mission, which is to entertain. And gosh, if there's any film in the Showa era that can entertain, it is certainly this film, which is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Whew, okay, so I think that is it for me. But I will just go here. And once again, I apologize for skipping over your comments. Oh, Ivan Danko, let's see. Hello, how are you doing? I hope you're well. Let's see. Yeah, Iacona23 says, I love how laid back and chill and supremely confident the alien leader was, even when there were setbacks and surprises to his plan. Nothing could ruffle that guy. Yes, that's right. Except at the very end, of course, when he couldn't believe, you know, Mechagodzilla could be beaten. And he was in shock. And perhaps that was the reason why he was susceptible to being attacked by his by the people he was holding captive there. He didn't notice. And of course, that pipe. That's a great pipe. Dinobot Curious says, this is just my take, but I kind of wish Instagram of Kings, instead of King Caesar, we had Anguished back, maybe Anguirus, I think, back, and Gigan as Mechagodzilla's sidekick, so it didn't seem one-sided. Maybe King Caesar could have been saved for 1975. Yeah, that is one thing about the one-sided fights. It's actually quite rare in Godzilla films where Godzilla will be fighting even-handedly. So it's a little bit. This can be seen as being a little bit one-sided or uneven. But if you recall, also Mechagodzilla is so strong in terms of the wealth of his arsenal on the one hand, and ultimately King Caesar. As much as I love King Caesar, don't get me wrong, he is a bit of an ineffective ally. I mean, he does hold his own a little bit, but he's a little bit like the. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Professor Wagura is a little bit less, less effective, perhaps. But King Caesar, I don't know how effective he was in the long run. But I'd like to think in my heart that it was because he was sleeping for a long time and maybe he was a little bit rusty. He just woke up. You know how you feel when you wake up. You're not necessarily ready to go out and exercise and expend all this energy. You're still trying to get ready. You need a cup of coffee or something like that. That's how I always like to think. King Caesar probably needed a cup of coffee after he woke up before he could really get into the fight. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, Dinobot, yes, I see your point of view. I just enjoy even tone it. Yes, I agree. I agree. It's, give me, Godzilla versus Gigan or something any day. All right, okay. Although, it is kind of evened out in the sense if we think about the terror of Mechagodzilla, I suppose. But the tables are turned, so to speak. But, oh well. Let's see. Okay, so, all right. So I think I'm going to call it a day and let's see here. Any final comments? If you have anything left to say, now's your chance. Otherwise, yes. Okay, so, all you lucky people says, arigatou gozaimashita. Oyasumi nasai. Thank you very much. こちらこそありがとうございました. And Pete1972 says, this has been a fantastic live stream. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. That's very kind of you to say. I really must thank you and everyone else here who participated. It's been really great. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for your kind words. But don't thank me. Thank everyone here. Everyone here. You all made it possible. So, and Pete1972, you are included in that group, of course. JR62, I feel the same way. Love it all. Thank you so much, JR62. You made some really great points. Jared says, bye, Daisuke. Hope you have a good night. Bye, everyone. Bye, Jared. I hope you're well. Alex says, a gorgeous discussion, Daisuke. Thank you as always. Thank you. I couldn't have wished for anything better. You are a gift for the film aficionado community here on YouTube. Thank you, and I appreciate. Well, you are just. I don't know what to say. I always. I can't speak because I'm kind of embarrassed. So, but in a good way. So, thank you very much for your kind words. But again, it's not me. It's the group. Everyone is really just like Mechagodzilla firing on all thrusters, right? It's really great. But thank you, Alex. You made some really great comments and some great questions. So you really helped to push the conversation along quite significantly. So I couldn't have done it without you and everyone else here. Let's see. Alex says coffee is a godsend. Yes, I agree. I agree. So I'd like to think King Caesar just needed that one extra cup of coffee, or 1 cup of coffee, in order to be able to fight Mechagodzilla most effectively. But oh well. Gray says, this is my first live watch ever. A great one. Arigato. Good night, everyone. Gray, wonderful to see you. You say you're in India. So thank you very much for watching all the way from there. And I'm glad to have been able to meet you over the past, I think, few videos, I think. So let's keep talking, Gray. I'd love to hear more about you and your favorite films and the like. Let's keep talking. We'll talk again in other comments. So bye for now, and hopefully I'll talk to you sooner rather than later, my dear friend. Thank you. Iacona says, King Caesar needed coffee. Now you've got me laughing out loud. He did a lot of hiding from what I saw. He did, yes, a lot of hiding. Although I do acknowledge, I did it at the beginning, I do acknowledge that he did hold his own at first. He knocked Mechagodzilla to the ground, don't forget, at the very beginning. He used his eye thing very effectively, and then he used that and ran right for Mechagodzilla. So he didn't show any signs of cowardice at the start. He was quite brave. He ran at Mechagodzilla at the beginning. It was only when Mechagodzilla changed his strategy from the eye beam to the finger rockets that King Caesar became vulnerable. And then the first thing he did, rather than try to think of a counterattack, the first instinct he did was to hide behind the mountain. So I think that is where the whole image of King Caesar unfortunately comes from. And he does the thing where he kind of gets up and he just falls, and then Mechagodzilla does the thing with like that, and then we see Godzilla come just in the nick of time, of course. Godzilla, in many respects, he's like the Nambara of the kaiju theater here in Mechagodzilla world, right? He comes just in the nick of time, just like Nambara comes just in the nick of time to save Shimizu and all that. But okay, all right. Let's see. Dinobot says, good night, Daisuke, and love the film. Thank you, Dinobot, for joining. I was glad to see you. Thank you very much for making. I know you're busy, so thank you very much. I'll talk to you again very soon, of course, my dear friend. Let's see. Alex, thank you so much. I'm glad you had fun. We'll talk again very soon, my dear friend. Thank you. Ivan Danko, you love your podcast. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Dinobot Q says, I hate audio correct. Oh yeah, I don't know. Is audio correct on here? I'm not sure, but yeah, 4K Cinema HD War of the Gargantuans is another film that will make a great film club discussion. Great suggestion. Alex says, thank you so much, everyone. And Gray Rainbow says, smiley face. So thank you. I think I will call it a night. And so thank you very much. Great Rainbow says, I'm Syrian though. So you are living in India, and you are Syrian. That's great, wonderful. I'm so glad to make your acquaintance, my friend. And 4K Cinema HD says Criterion has the rights to War of the Gargantuans and Ronin. I do hope they get a release in the near future. I did hear that as well. We're not. I would love to see a release of those as well one day. Sooner rather than later. Who knows? Who knows what will happen with Criterion and Kaiju? More the merrier. Why stop at Showa era as well? Let's go Heisei. Let's go even further if we can. Don't know if we can, but fingers crossed as always. As I said, the set is not perfect. It is not perfect by any stretch, but it is better than nothing. Although I must stress once again, please remember that the name of the character is Sayako Kanagusku. It's not Sayako Kaneshiro. Please let Criterion know that the name is Sayako Kanagusku. I think that's very important. That's like saying, I don't know, it's like saying, it's like saying Charles Foster Kane's name is John Kane. It's not the same. It's not the same. It's Sayako Kanagusku. That's her name. And so if you guys, anyone is still out there, if you want to give any trivia to any Godzilla experts, ask, this is a bit of trivia. Her name is Sayako Kanagusuku. That's her name, and so you can use that as a bit of trivia, just to show how much Godzilla trivia you know, because that's actually a very important point. So, but anyway, my friends, sorry to keep you waiting or keep you like this. So I will call it a night because it's already 2.5 hours. So thank you very much, my dear friends, and next time is, let's see, 2 weeks from now, same time, same place. Is that right? February 8th, I think. Is that right? Do I have that right? February 8th? Yes, February 8th. The film is, let's see, so Saturday, February 8th, 11 p.m. The film that I plan to talk about is Blood and Black Lace. Mario Bava film, Blood and Black Lace. So that should be a different type of film than this, but still, I think, very intriguing work. Very, very intriguing indeed. Not for everyone. It's kind of a violent, pretty disturbing film, although it's not as violent as, say, modern giallo or horror slasher films. It's still got some quite a sinister edge to it, so it's not for everyone. So please don't watch the film if you are if you don't like to watch maybe somewhat stylized violent films and the like. But if that is okay with you, then please feel free to join us. I will talk more about that as we get closer to the date. Also, please note that I just lost my train of thought. I just lost my train. You know, sometimes that happens. I just lost. Oh, yes. Also, the community tab on my YouTube page can lead you to a poll that I am using to ask you to vote for one of 5 films that you would like to discuss later in February. And so they are all Japanese films. And so please vote for your favorite one. The poll will be open until February 8th. And at which time I will show the winner of the poll will be the film that will be spoken about later on in the month. So if you haven't voted for the poll and you still want to, you still have time, go to the community tab and check out the poll. So there are 5 Japanese films. I think at the moment the film that is in the lead is the anime film Akira, Katsuhiro Otomo's film Akira, from the mid to late 80s. So if you want to vote for that or any other film in the poll, please feel free to do so. You have until February 8th. Okay, there we go. So, my friends, that's it for now. So let me say thank you very much for sticking around as long as you did, and thank you very much for your comments about this wonderful film, my favorite in the Showa era, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. So have a great rest of your day, my dear friends, wherever you are in the world. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. And please let me know if you have any recommendations for any great movies. Please feel free to drop a comment, drop me a line at any time. As always, I'm all ears when it comes to this stuff. So, all right, my friends, cheers and be well. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time, my friends. It was a lot of fun. Thank you. And there we go. So I know the camera's still on, so just clean up here. But my friends, thank you for your time and energy. As always, it's been such a... oh gosh, you know, I forgot to even mention, I was going to mention King Kong Escapes, Mechanicong, as being a kind of early example of this idea of mechanized versions of monsters as well. I was going to talk about that, but I just let it slip by, as it were. Oh gosh, that is not good. But, oh well, that maybe we'll save that for another discussion. But anyway, my friends, if you have any more comments or anything, please feel free to leave a comment below. But if not, I am out. So thank you very much. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.